Some stories begin with a single choice, others with a single lie. But in the affluent neighborhood of Lakeside Ridge, just north of Charleston, South Carolina, it began with a crash. Violent, sudden, and soaked in rain. The kind of night where everything feels a little too quiet, a little too fragile, like the world is holding its breath. On April 18th, 22 at 9:46 p.m., a silver Mercedes S-Class veered off the winding road that cuts through the residential hills and collided head-on with a massive oak tree. The passenger side caved in, the engine hissing. The man inside, barely alive. His name was Mark Ellison. 38 years old, an award-winning architect known for his glass and steel dreams across the eastern seaboard, he had built towers that reached for the sky. But on that rainy night, he couldn't lift a finger. His body was broken, his lungs filling slowly with blood. Sitting beside him, almost untouched, was Clara Ellison. 35, polished, magnetic, and the owner of an upscale boutique brand that catered to Charleston's wealthiest clientele. She made the 911 call at 9:48 p.m. Her voice was rushed, frightened, and clear. "There was a deer. It jumped out. I couldn't stop. Please, he's hurt." What the call didn't capture was how calm she really was. How she checked her watch before dialing. How she didn't look at Mark even once. Mark was rushed to St. Jude's Medical Center with severe head trauma, multiple rib fractures, and internal bleeding. By midnight, he was in a medically induced coma. Clara, meanwhile, left the hospital with a sprained wrist and a few minor cuts. She cried for the cameras. She gave statements. She appeared shattered. But within 48 hours, she had already purchased a burner phone. And on that burner phone, she sent a message to a man named Damon West. "It's done. He won't wake up. We can start planning." Before we go deeper into this story, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from. We always love hearing from you. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a single case. Some of them, like this one, will follow you long after the screen goes dark. In the months leading up to the crash, the Ellisons' marriage had begun to show quiet cracks. Nothing loud, nothing public, but enough for the careful observer to notice. It started, like many unravelings do, with distance. Mark, consumed by deadlines and back-to-back design projects, spent more time in New York than at home. Clara, left to her own devices, found attention elsewhere. In November of 21, she joined an exclusive wellness club in the city's historic Battery District. That's where she met Damon. 28, sculpted and charismatic in the way that made women forget their rings. What began as personal training sessions quickly turned into private lunches, then hotel rooms, then receipts, hundreds of dollars spent at a boutique hotel tucked into the quiet corner of East Bay Street. Mark first noticed something was off in early February. Clara had left her phone on the bathroom sink while showering. A message lit up, just 3 words. "You free tonight?" It was from someone saved as DC. When he asked, Clara laughed. "Diana Carter, new client. She's a nightmare." But nightmares, Mark would later learn, don't send selfies in lingerie. The real fracture came at the end of the month. Mark, desperate to salvage whatever was left, reached out to a marriage counselor. Clara refused. "You're the one gone 80 hours a week," she snapped. "You fix it." And so on the night of April 18th, 22, after a tense dinner at a high-rise restaurant overlooking the harbor, Clara drove Traffic cameras would later show the car moving steadily until just past a quiet intersection, it drifted, then lunged off the road. No braking. In fact, it accelerated. Impact analysis would confirm it. The oak tree stood firm. Mark never saw it coming. And Clara? She walked away, unscathed, unmoved. Clara Ellison knew how to wear grief like a tailored coat. In the days that followed the crash, she was everywhere, appearing outside the hospital with eyes rimmed red, giving brief statements to reporters, holding back tears, just long enough to seem strong, but not long enough to appear detached. She lit candles, accepted flowers, whispered prayers. The cameras loved her, but the hospital staff saw something else. Behind closed doors, Clara was all timing and efficiency. Signing forms, redirecting calls, asking pointed questions about financial liability. And while Mark lay still, suspended in a coma, she made her first major move. On April 21st, just 3 days after the crash, Clara contacted a real estate agent. The Ellisons' lakefront home, $2.4 million in appraisal, glass walls and all, was listed by the end of that week. She told friends it was too painful to stay in the house, too many memories. But the truth was simpler. She needed the cash. It wasn't always like this. Just a year earlier, Clara would linger by Mark's drafting table, tracing the edges of his blueprints with her fingers, teasing him about adding more curves to his otherwise brutalist designs. They used to fall asleep on the couch, wrapped in each other's schedules, eating takeout from the same Thai place every Tuesday. He once built her a custom display case for her boutique's flagship store, and she cried when she saw it. Real tears. But somewhere between her late-night Pilates sessions and Mark's third red-eye to Manhattan, they drifted. She stopped asking when he'd be home. He stopped noticing when she wasn't. And when she met Damon West, a personal trainer with a smile that could disarm bank alarms, she didn't hesitate. By May, Clara had sold the house. Proceeds, $90 million, quietly funneled into a private account under her maiden name. Within weeks, she had liquidated Mark's vintage watch collection and cashed out 2 of his short-term investments, citing medical expenses to anyone who asked. Those close to her saw a woman trying to stay afloat, but those watching more closely saw a pattern. Clara wasn't surviving. She was rebuilding. Meanwhile, Mark lay trapped inside his body. At St. Jude's Medical, doctors noted gradual neural responses. Small things at first, slight pupil dilation, a twitch in his right hand, a faint reflex when his name was whispered. On June 3rd, a nurse noticed tears sliding down his temple during a late-night shift. He wasn't conscious, but he was there. He drifted in and out of memory. Sometimes he was 17 again, sneaking whiskey in the back of his father's truck. Other times, he was on the beach with Clara, sand in his shoes, her laughter in the air before he knew what betrayal smelled like. In those moments, there was peace. Then flashes, a deer, a swerve, pain blooming behind his eyes like fireworks. By July, Clara had moved into a sleek apartment in downtown Lakeside with Damon. She told her inner circle that Mark's condition was unchanged but hopeless. She posed for photos at charity events, sipping wine beside her new partner. She even told a local lifestyle magazine that she was learning to live again. Mark's first words came on the morning of July 2nd, barely audible, hoarse, and cracked. "Where? Clara?" The nurse froze. It was the beginning of the end. As his strength slowly returned, so did fragments of memory, and with them, a gut feeling that whatever had happened that night wasn't just an accident. He began asking questions, quietly at first. Then, late one night, he borrowed a phone from a sympathetic nurse and dialed the only number that hadn't changed in 15 years. Ryan Bennett, Mark's best friend, and soon the only person who would believe what he had to say. Ryan Bennett had always known Mark Ellison as a builder of towers, of ideas, of futures. But when the call came late that July night, the voice on the other end wasn't building anything. It was fractured, apart. Mark didn't say much, just that something wasn't right, and that he needed help. Ryan didn't hesitate. They met 3 days later in a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria. Mark, still pale and hunched in a wheelchair, looked nothing like the man who once stood tall at ribbon cuttings and gala fundraisers. But behind his tired eyes was something sharp, something awakening. Clara hadn't visited in weeks. Her name hadn't been mentioned by staff since early June. Ryan, who had tried, unsuccessfully, to check on Mark in the past, now saw just how deep the abandonment ran. And when Mark asked, "You saw her, didn't you, with him?" Ryan answered the only way a real friend could, "I did, and I'm sorry." They began digging that night. There was a small leather-bound notebook Ryan always carried, something he'd had since college. He used it for everything: grocery lists, story ideas, business contacts. Now, it became a case file. He scribbled notes, while Mark recounted everything he could remember: the text messages, the strange angle of the crash, Clara's calm voice on the 911 call. He noted every detail, even the way Mark described Clara's last look before the world went black, empty, like she'd already moved on. Ryan contacted a friend who worked at a private security firm. Within days, they had access to traffic cam footage from the night of the crash. The Mercedes wasn't swerving, it was gliding, controlled. At the moment of impact, there was no brake flash. Worse still, they recovered archived footage from a nearby gas station showing Clara's car parked there for 20 minutes before the crash. She wasn't lost. She was waiting. Mark couldn't sleep after that. His nights became a blur of hospital beeps and silent screams. He'd stare at the ceiling, whispering Clara's name like it might summon some explanation better than the one forming in his mind. Each morning, he asked for a laptop. By the end of August, the hospital relented. He and Ryan built a spreadsheet: dates, transfers, patterns. Clara had moved money with surgical precision, $250K wired to an offshore account in the Bahamas. Multiple luxury purchases traced back to their joint cards. She had sold his watch collection, their Florida getaway condo, even his father's vintage Porsche. But it wasn't just the theft. It was the betrayal that lodged deep. Mark remembered their wedding day, how Clara had slipped a note into his palm just before the ceremony. Let's build something no one can tear down, it read. That memory haunted him now, because everything they'd built, she dismantled brick by brick with a smile on her face. They needed more. Ryan hired a private investigator named Elsie Tran, a retired fraud analyst who didn't smile much and never missed details. Within a week, Elsie had recovered Clara's deleted search history from a backup server. Among the entries, crash, fatality odds, passenger side, life insurance loopholes, and how to disable airbags. That was the moment Mark stopped hoping Clara would come back. He began recording. Using the hospital's borrowed laptop, he started video diaries. At first, it was raw pain, confusion, disbelief, but slowly they became organized. Dates, data, emotional markers, witness accounts. Mark was building again, but this time it wasn't towers. It was a record, a blueprint for justice. And while Clara was sipping wine in rooftop bars, Mark was preparing to reclaim the ground beneath her feet. It began with the window. The townhouse Clara now shared with Damon West had a second-floor window overlooking the street. From the sidewalk, you couldn't see much, but from the woods behind the property, from just beyond the reach of street lamps, you could see everything. Mark Ellison knew this because he had spent nearly 2 weeks charting it. Every light that turned on, every door that opened, every routine that repeated itself like clockwork. Clara watered her patio plants at 7:04 a.m. sharp. Damon left for his training clients by 6:10. On Thursdays, Clara poured herself a glass of white wine and sat alone under the string lights, always in silence. That's when Mark started filming. Using a borrowed DSLR camera with a telephoto lens, courtesy of Ryan and a sympathetic friend at a local college, Mark recorded everything. He operated out of a rundown motel a few blocks away, one of those places where no one asked questions and no one answered them either. His room had peeling wallpaper and a flickering ceiling fan. But to Mark, it was a war room. In a tattered notebook beside his bed, Mark wrote down phrases he couldn't say aloud. She laughed at the funeral director's handshake. He wore my cufflinks. She looked happiest when talking about plans I was never part of. These weren't just observations. They were wounds he was cataloging. By mid-September, Mark had compiled hours of footage, Clara and Damon moving through a life funded by theft and betrayal. Dining at restaurants Mark had once designed, wearing watches he had once kept in velvet-lined drawers. Damon wore one every Friday, a silver Omega. Mark had bought it for their 5th anniversary. Elsie Tran, the private investigator, helped organize the footage and tie it to financial records. Over $2.1 million assets had been siphoned from Mark's accounts since the crash. The second boutique Clara opened, paid in full with Mark's business reserve fund. Their new townhouse, purchased under a shell corporation linked to Clara's maiden name. And still, Clara showed no sign of remorse. She laughed at charity events, spoke about new beginnings. Once, Mark caught a clip of her on a live stream panel for young entrepreneurs. She said with unnerving calm, "Sometimes tragedy is the push we need to rediscover ourselves." Mark paused the video, rewound it, played it again. "Tragedy," he whispered. "You mean me?" There were nights he'd sit in the dark with nothing but the glow of the laptop screen, watching Clara toast to her future while he tried to remember what peace used to feel like. The wine, the dresses, the company, all of it stolen. Not just money, but identity, history, the very idea of who he used to be. He began leaving video messages for himself, not diaries, warnings. "If you're watching this," one began, "and you're thinking of forgiveness, remember the oak tree. Remember her eyes." In October, Elsie handed Mark a dossier. It contained everything: bank records, surveillance screenshots, time-stamped footage, metadata chains. Enough, she said, to press charges. Enough to build a case. But Mark hesitated. He didn't say it out loud, but Ryan saw it in his face. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about something else, something darker. The man who had once drafted blueprints for skyscrapers now sketched routes through alleyways and escape plans through storm drains. He tracked police response times, identified neighborhood blind spots. He knew which neighbors left their porch lights on and which ones walked their dogs after dark. He wasn't preparing for a court date. He was preparing for something final. August 11th, 2022. Thunder rolled in early that evening. The sky above Lakeside Ridge was bruised purple, low and angry. Storm sirens wailed in the distance. But on a quiet street tucked beneath swaying trees, only one man moved, like he had waited his whole life for this storm: Mark Ellison. He wore black gloves and waterproof boots. In his coat pocket, a printed packet of surveillance screenshots, financial records, and a single wedding photo. Clara laughing in a sunbeam, holding Mark's hand like she meant it. He studied that photo for one last second before slipping it into the gutter. Security cameras around the townhouse blinked red, but the rain distorted their view. It was 8:43 p.m. Clara was alone. Damon was working a late shift. The lights on the back patio were on just like every Thursday. And Clara was there, wine glass in hand, umbrella light casting gold on her face. Mark entered through the rear gate, bypassing the latch with a swift flick of his pocket knife. Mud covered his boots. His heart beat not in fear, but with cold, singular focus. Clara didn't scream when she saw him, didn't even stand. She blinked once and said, "I thought you were dead." Mark stepped into the light. "I was." They moved to the kitchen. Clara poured another glass, never offering him one. She didn't ask how he escaped or why he was there. She simply said, "So what now? You want to ruin me?" Mark set the folder down on the table. Inside, bank records, property deeds, footage stills, and one printout of Clara's search history. "You already did that," he said. She flipped through the pages without urgency. "So dramatic, Mark. You think this is all some great betrayal, but I was dying too, just quieter." Mark stared at her. "You tried to kill me." Clara leaned back, eyes glinting. "No, I just stopped trying to save you." The silence thickened, and then Clara reached for her phone. Mark's eyes flicked to the object on the mantel, a crystal vase. Their wedding gift. She had kept it. Of course she had. Clara's fingers were almost at the screen when Mark stepped forward. "Don't." She froze, then smiled. "You don't have the guts." What happened next wasn't a blur. It was crystal. Mark picked up the vase. Heavy, cold, familiar. He struck once, then again and again, until the sound of thunder outside was the only thing louder. At 9 Ekatemet, Clara Ellison was dead. Mark wiped the handle, staged the scene, opened drawers, jewelry on the floor, a window forced from the inside. He knew the drill. The dossier Elsie had prepared was already tucked into a sealed envelope at Ryan's apartment, with instructions, "If anything happens to me, send this to the police." He slipped into the storm, leaving behind broken glass and a woman who had once sworn forever. Damon Caldwell returned at 10:32 p.m. His 911 call was panicked, stuttering. "There's blood. Geez, oh my God, please hurry." Police arrived within minutes. What they found didn't sit right. Nothing truly valuable was missing. No forced entry they could trace. But Clara was gone. Detectives Emma Castillo and Victor Reynolds were assigned the case. Within 48 hours, the robbery theory collapsed. Footage from the alley showed a figure matching Mark's build. And then came the motel. Elsie, following Mark's instructions, handed over everything: the recordings, the spreadsheets, the blueprint of betrayal, and the final entry Mark had made: "If justice isn't coming, I'll bring the reckoning myself." Mark Ellison was arrested without resistance. At the station, he didn't speak for 6 hours. When he finally did, he said only, "I didn't kill her out of anger. I killed her because she left me no other way to live." The trial, held in January 20, drew national attention. Prosecutors leaned on premeditation. Defense attorneys cited years of betrayal, trauma, and psychological collapse. Ryan Bennett testified. Elsie trained too. Even hospital staff recounted Mark's slow, painful recovery. In the end, the jury deliberated for 5 days. Their verdict: voluntary manslaughter, 15 years in prison, eligible for parole in 8. At sentencing, Mark spoke directly to the judge. "I spent my whole life building things: homes, skylines, futures. I never thought I'd be the one to destroy something. But I died in that car, Your Honor. I just didn't know it yet." Some say he got off easy. Others say he never had a chance. But for those who watched this story unfold, not on a screen, but in courtrooms and homes across the country, it became something more. A cautionary tale of love, betrayal, and the terrible things we do when we believe the world has forgotten us. Well, if you stayed with me all the way through, I sure appreciate the company. Go on and tap that like and subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this, told slow and easy, right here by the firelight. Take good care now.